Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer on the World Puja Network. Dr. Greer was called out of town unexpectedly, so this is Linda Willitts and Dr. Ted Loder. We'll be discussing the topic of how ETs have communicated with us on CSETI expeditions over the past 11, 12 years that we've both been doing this work with Dr. Greer. And just to give you an idea of a brief kind of outline of the topics we'll address, the ETs have communicated with us over the many years with virtually all of our senses, except I can't think really of a taste example, but all of our other physical senses they have communicated in, and also consciousness, which is a very big part of how they communicate. And sometimes their communication is extremely obvious. Anyone looking in that direction would see it. And many times it's very subtle. So I'll let Dr. Loder set the stage for what we do on these CSETI expeditions.
Well, thank you very much, Linda. It's a pleasure to be with you. And doing this, you and I have spent, I don't know, who knows how many weeks, dozens of weeks in the field together, observing and learning about ETs and how they connect with us. So it's going to be fun to talk about this. Just for our readers, our listeners' interest here, a lot of this information, we actually, you and I and others put together a chapter back in the late 90s in Dr. Greer's first book called Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications, and we have a chapter in there called Nighttime UFO Extraterrestrial Phenomena Observed by the CSETI Field Teams. And so people want to find out more about that or sort of read up on some of the things we're going to talk about and others. That's a good place to start. So,
definitely.
Let me set this.
And it's funny because we keep needing to do addendums to that chapter because so many more things have happened over the years.
That is so true. In fact, when we wrote that back in the 98 or 99, I guess December 98 is when I put it together, we had just been working with Steve for just a couple of years at that point. So
right.
Lots of stuff has happened since then. Well, let me set the stage here so people kind of understand the environment and the situation in which the CSETI field teams operate. We typically will go out in the field somewhere in a quiet, away from civilization and away from house lights and road lights, et cetera, area, although many things can be seen in those areas too, but we typically take a team in the desert, in the Joshua Tree, or sometimes in Colorado and places, et cetera. And we'll take a group out and we'll sit in a circle, all facing inward, so that somebody within the circle is looking in every direction, basically. So with a circle, in other words, the entire sky is covered by one of the team members observing. And you can do this with 4 people, 3 people, or 40 people. Just the size of the circle increases. And we usually just sit quietly observing, and then we go through a whole bunch of protocols dealing with the contact protocols, et cetera, which we might get into a little later. But this way, in all senses, as Linda said, except taste. We just haven't found taste yet that I've seen or felt or tasted. So that we do, and I'll let some of the things are very, very subtle, and I'll let Linda start with some of the subtle things, and then we'll end up at the end of the hour here, toward the end of the hour, talking about some of the things that are incredibly obvious, mostly visual type things that anybody looking in that direction would say, wow. So, Linda, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. Well, I think we'll end up with the visual things and the consciousness things because most of our experiences occur within those senses. And I'll start with some of the shorter topics to talk about, and one of which is smell. And over the years, we've had a number of people within our circle that will occasionally get a little waft of a fragrance, and usually it's a floral fragrance, a lovely fragrance, and there's nothing in the area that could possibly have created that fragrance. And I'd say the most astounding example of this fragrance phenomenon occurred a couple of weeks ago in Joshua Tree National Park. When we were all there were 44 people in our circle, and every single person in the circle got this tremendously strong and beautiful fragrance of carnations. And it started on one side of the circle, and it ultimately wafted over to the other side of the circle, and it lasted 15 or 20 minutes. And the carnation scent is the scent that often indicates the presence of this universal avatar that appears with our groups quite often. And Dr. Greer is in direct contact with them, and this set off a chain of events that was just incredible in Joshua Tree that week. But did you smell that fragrance, Ted?
You know, I was going to say, actually, I didn't. And what happened was that just before that happened, my field partner and I had just had a sip of tea, aromatic tea. It was kind of cold and was a little warm-up thing, and we just had a little sip of it, and oddly enough, we had this sip of this aromatic tea, which happens to be constant comment for sake of interest here, and it's very aromatic, and as a result, I think it dulled our senses, so we ended up I can't smell anything. Well, the tea was overwhelming, but everybody, around us, it did smell it. So we were feeling a little left out, and swore that we would. Emily, how do you know?
Right, you never know when to take that sip of tea.
Exactly.
When interfere with.
One of those hazards of trying to stay warm sometimes.
You were also sitting on the far side of the circle.
That's right.
From Dr. Greer and myself, and obviously Dr. Greer is the center of a lot of the effects that we experience, and so.
Yep.
So we got the strongest aroma in the area of the circle where I was sitting, and then it became lighter as it wafted over. But this is, we're in a desert. It's sandy. There's a few little plants, dry as a bone, and really no smells in the air, and this wonderful aroma of carnations came through the whole group. So.
Right. And by the way, just so people know that whenever something like that happens. We point it out, or it's pointed out by Dr. Greer or one of the team members, and then we just sort of check with people, has anybody had hand lotion out or, any of that sort of thing that might contribute. And, when the answer comes back, no, everybody's just been sitting there quietly, kind of observing and being quiet, you start to realize this is an external phenomena to the group, and it's quite impressive, actually. It's quite awesome.
Yeah, it was.
So.
And so that's a pretty strong example of the fragrance phenomenon that we've experienced. And as I said, some people more individually, not necessarily the whole circle, but just little groups of people within the circle or individuals have also experienced that. Mm-hmm. And probably the next sense I'd talk about would be hearing. And,
yep, I would agree.
And we have had, sometimes the sounds are sounds that can be recorded on a recorder. I've had my recorder running many times when we've had an anomalous ET sound, and by anomalous, it's no animal sound. We've almost always in our groups got some local people who know the local animals in the area, and we've also we spend a week out in particular areas, so we have an opportunity to hear any of the local birds or animals that might make a sound. And usually the ET sound will be somewhat electronic sounding and anomalous in that sense. And there's one that happened in Mount Shasta in 2005 that I had my recorder running because Dr. Greer was doing one of his guided meditations. And not coincidentally, he left, he kind of paused for a moment. And during that pause, this sound occurred about 5 people to the left of me and kind of behind the circle. And it did get recorded on my recorder, and we've got a loop of it on the CSETI, CSE.org website, CSETI.org website. But the anomalous thing about ET sounds that is just so incredible is that the sound, not only does it sound otherworldly, but the sound creates a vision in your that you can picture. The sound creates a picture. And this particular sound that happened in Mount Shasta, myself, I saw it as a string of large, dark, kind of gray pearls. and every pearl in the string, it was a trilling sound that had several different, number of trills to it. So every trill was a pearl, and several other people, like a lot, 7, 8, 9 people saw that same thing as that sound as a string of pearls. And there's been other sounds that I've had, like an arrow of sound go in my right ear and stay in my head, not come out my left ear. And it sounds like kind of painful, but it wasn't. It's really interesting. And, I mean, you would swear that it was an audible sound that could have been recorded. However, when that particular event happened in Crestone, Colorado, I had my recorder on, and I did not record it. That sound didn't appear on the recorder. And not only did I hear that, but Dr. Greer to my right heard it. A number of people on either side of him and the other side of myself heard it. And then it was strange because some people on our side of the circle didn't hear it, but other people on the totally opposite side of the circle heard it.
It's very anomalous, and I think that's an interesting thing to point out, that there are various reasons why some people hear the sounds and other people don't. In some cases, the sound appears to be very directed, say toward one side of the circle or another. In other cases, the sounds are very high frequency, and some of the older folks in the crowd don't hear those very high frequencies, so they may totally miss it. Or they may be wearing a big hat to try to keep warm if we're out in the winter, if you will, and they kind of miss it because they're wearing a big hat. And we try to, in the field, is put off wearing any kind of hat as long as possible, or at least not covering the ears as much as possible in order to be able to hear these anomalous types of sounds, which, as Linda said, can be sort of a clicking or a trilling, but also a buzzing, a humming, or sometimes a screeching type sound. We've heard all kinds of different sounds, including kind of shuffling behind the group as though somebody was walking when everybody was sitting in their seats and nobody else around.
And oftentimes the sounds would be omnidirectional. For example, we actually even did have that happen in Joshua Tree a couple of weeks ago, where Dr. Greer and I and several other people had walked out on a path right at the very beginning when we first arrived at the field site while other people were getting set up. And we walked out there, and suddenly this ET anomalous sound occurred, and we were standing in a tight little clump at the time looking at stars and talking, and each of us heard it coming from a different direction, and we should have all, being in the same little clump, we should have all heard it. If it was an earthly sound, we would have heard it, coming from the same direction. So it's omnidirectional, which is also really mysterious.
I might mention in terms of sounds that one of the sounds that we often play when we're in the field site was a sound recorded in a crop circle in England by, I believe it was the BBC, with high-quality video recorders. And that was actually went on for quite a bit of time, several minutes. And it's the one thing we often play in the field because it's a very interesting sound, particularly when it's slowed down a bit.
That's right. Good point. And we do. We play it. We play these tones. We call them the crop circle tones, and we play them in the field, and we transmit them with little hand walkie-talkies out into space. And we have had the ETs, while we're transmitting with these little walkie-talkies, the ETs have repeated the sound back through the transmitters. The transmitters have received the tones back from the ETs while we were transmitting.
It's very interesting, and there's always something new happening in terms of the sounds and the issues out there.
It never fails to amaze us because every single time that we spend a week in the field, the ETs do something even more different, from anything they've done before.
One of the sounds that happened a couple years ago, again in Joshua Tree, is that the group was sitting in the circle again, and a craft is pitch dark, total starlit night. I was not there. Maybe Linda can describe it better, but this craft appeared right above the group, a small craft, and the sound it made was sort of a wow, 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 as it just moved right over the group and then vanished. Linda, do you want to describe it further?
Oh, yeah. It was an optional night, so there were only about 15 of us in the circle in Joshua Tree that night. yeah, we were sitting there. It was totally quiet. We're in 20, 30 miles from any civilization, and absolutely this craft flew it right over us, maybe not very far above us, maybe 15 feet above us, and it did make this really unusual sound, like Ted just described. Men, I think, are better at making sounds than women. I don't quite.
Wah.
Yeah, I can't do it very well. I call them male noises. But anyway, it definitely made that sound, and it was just really bizarre, and then it crossed our group, and then vanished. And it was incredible.
So I think that pretty much summarizes some of the kinds of sounds. To summarize quickly, from electronic beepings, buzzings, clickings, hummings, to other sort of sounds that we've just described to you, the crop circle sounds, etc. One of the other kinds of sounds that we often hear, which is a little bit different here, is that the coyotes and some of the other creatures of the desert, whatever, will often suddenly, inexplicably start howling. They do that, of course. But very often, if we sense that there's an ET craft nearby, we'll often hear the coyotes howling.
Yeah, the animals sense it too. It's really interesting. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to the next sense, which would be feeling, and feeling in the sense of both touch and emotions we get from the ETs. And a number of us have been touched over the years. Many of us, literally, where you're standing or sitting and you think that one of your team members has come up and laid a hand on your shoulder or something, a touch that obvious, and you look and there's no one there.
Yeah, people very often during this sort of a contact event, as we describe it, will have incredibly emotional feelings of warmth and love. Sometimes so strong, people are actually sort of moved to tears and describe the thing in a broken voice because they're so moved by it. It's I know it sounds a little bizarre, but this is happening. So if people sort of open up when we're in the field, people sort of open up their heart, if you will, I'll put it in those sort of terms. You can very often feel that those sort of feelings as well. It's quite wonderful, actually.
That's true, and oftentimes many of us in the group can detect the same sort of theme of the night. Like sometimes we are really, like Ted said, just overcome by the feelings of love that we're getting from the beings around us. And other times we'll get a sense of playfulness and joy, sometimes a sense of real seriousness. And back to the physical touch, I haven't personally experienced this, but a few members of our group several times over the years have experienced, while they're just standing on firm ground, a sense that, for example, if they were standing like on a wooden hollow spot and something thumped up underneath one of their feet.
Yes, I remember people describing that several times.
Yeah, things, like that. So that sort of a feeling has also happened many times to certain group members. So now we kind of left the most common for last, and that is sight and also consciousness, which kind of fits. ETs communicate all the time with us in consciousness, and often, we're usually in a meditative state when we go out there. Dr. Greer does these most wonderful guided meditations, and so for the whole night that we're out there, we're in a meditative state with expanded consciousness, and we're detecting subtle communications from the ETs, telepathic communications, and then visual things, which range anywhere from totally obvious, just incredible things that happen. ET craft come into our atmosphere and they're just glowing brilliantly, where anyone who's facing in that direction would see it. And actually some of the things we've seen have been reported to the UFO reporting service online. We've gone back and checked later. And then very often, because our military detection systems can now detect the ETs as soon as they enter our atmosphere, the ETs very often now come and be with us in the astral state. And you can practice with being able to see that, and you can train your eyes to be able to see, and it's a real subtle effect that looks kind of like fireflies flying around. Only we typically do this work in the western dry areas where they don't even have fireflies, for one thing, but it's like a real subtle sparkling that you'll see. And ETs often appear as literal ghostly shapes. I mean, they're kind of foggy and just shaped like little ghosts or large ghosts, depending on their size, or little shapes of sparkles.
The interesting thing about that is that the actual awareness of that phenomena ranges depending on who is observing, from I don't see anything at all to some people who will see just a little gray sort of an area that's sort of lit up, it's almost like Casper the Ghost, or without the big smile, and so a little more obvious to somebody who puts their eyes into sort of a soft focus and just watches an area, to sometimes areas which actually almost light up. Sometimes you can bring your hand through that area and your hand will sparkle. It's quite an amazing phenomena. And right on up to some of the team members have actually been able to resolve and actually see humanoid ET form, and be able to describe the ET right on down to the size, what the ET is wearing, and what they look like. So, and yet somebody else standing right beside you may not be able to see anything at all. So there's a training of your perception that goes on. And people say, well, that's impossible. Everybody can see things. But let's think about this for a minute. There's wavelengths of light in the UV, higher energy, and then the infrared, lower energy. That some people can see further into those wavelengths or frequencies than other people. And some of these phenomena are occurring just outside our normal visual perception areas. And so you have to sort of train yourself to see some of these things. And I've been standing beside people who are telling me, well, don't you see it, or see the ETs right in front of you? And all I'm seeing is a little glowing area, and this person is able to describe the thing, the ET, in complete detail. So, and have it confirmed by others in the group, right on down to the details. So it's a very interesting set of phenomena. So we find very often that people who go into the field with us for the first time or two say, golly, I can't see anything, and yet other people describing describing the ETs in detail.
That's right. Some people just have that capability more highly developed, but I think virtually everyone for sure can train themselves to see the sparkles or the kind of cloudiness. I know that I couldn't see that initially, and now I'm pretty good at it, and it really is interesting because I've thinking to an experience in Joshua Tree again, where we were walking out on this particular path, and there were ETs that were very brightly lit. I was seeing them as kind of ghostly shapes, but glowing. They were bright. They were really obviously bright. And then a military aircraft flew over really low. I think it actually detected them. And they dimmed down so that you couldn't see them anymore. And then after the plane left, they brightened back up again. And we've seen that happen with actual ET saucer-shaped crafts in the field. One time we were doing a training in Arizona, and our circle was on one side of a small mountain, and over the back of that mountain, for the whole evening we were out there, we saw kind of a rosy glow, and we're wondering what it was because there weren't any lights at all in the area. And so as we were leaving, we went out a road to the highway, and I was in the vehicle with Dr. Greer and some other people, and we stopped and we looked back, and there, nestled against the other side of that little mountain that we had been on the opposite side of, was a distinct saucer-shaped, like foggy area that was glowing in a rosy color. And this is again in the Arizona desert where it's bone dry, and so there really is no opportunity for fog, and so we saw that foggy shaped craft that was glowing kind of rosy, and then there were 2 or 3 other crafts that weren't necessarily rosy, they were grayish more, but they were also glowing. And then it was interesting because if a car would come by on the highway, they would dim down, and then when we were alone with them again, they would brighten up a little bit. And we've seen that a number of times, a number of our trainings. We've seen the craft, we see it actually every single time. We see an ET craft that's either a foggy shape a little bit in the distance, or sometimes it's right around us. And when the craft is right around us, we see a lot of sparkles, or kind of a whole fogginess will engulf the group. In a different, back
to the sounds issue again, very often when that is happening, and I know this sounds unbelievable to some of our listeners, but when that happens, the sound qualities of the area we're in the group change. It's as though you're inside a big room.
That's right.
It's a subtle thing, but it's very perceptible if you just sort of listen to it. And there's this very, very subtle but very distinct, discernible change in the quality of the sound around you. I forgot to mention that when we talked about sounds.
That's true. For
it's really
example,
cool, actually.
If there have been kind of crickets or kind of cricket sounds in the distance, we won't hear those anymore. Or Dr. Greer's voice when he speaks will echo, and he's in an arena of some sort.
And while we're on that, so when that phenomena happens, very often the air will get stiller and everybody will feel warmer. It's so you're in an energy field. And I remember many years ago up in Colorado near Crestone, up on a mountainside in an area that we had contact before. Several of us went up to there after the training was over, so this doesn't have to be done with Dr. Greer present. And several of us had gone up to an area where we had been a few nights before that and had contact. And we got into that area and we'd done some meditation, and we walked into the area, and several of the people could see the gray little areas around us, so the ETs are around us. And we walked in further into the area, and it was just like walking into a hot shower. In other words, we had walked into the equivalent of a craft or something. There was an energy field around us. And it was totally perceptible by all of us. It was just amazing. You're up on the mountainside, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, gentle breeze blowing, cold, and you're walking into what felt like a hot shower. It was amazing.
That's really true, and it happens all the time. And it never fails to amaze us, though, that when we're inside a craft, and I mean, we've literally had. A lot of the newer vehicles have thermometers in them, temperature gauges in them. And for example, last year at Joshua Tree, the vehicle that I was riding in was registering 64 degrees parked right next to our field site. And when we got out on the highway, which is 3 miles down the road, but at the same elevation, it was like 39 degrees. That big of a difference. I mean, literally, when you get engulfed by an etheric craft, you start unbuttoning your jacket, taking, off gloves. People take off gloves. I mean, you literally start feeling much, much warmer, and it's just really strange. And it's wonderful, too. It's really comfortable.
Oh, yes.
The ETs take care of us a lot of times.
One of the other things that people say, well, why haven't you photographed this sort of thing? And in reality, we have tried to do some photographs of some of these phenomena in the field. They're very, very subtle. One thing we do see in photographs a lot of, and that is the orbs that people have talked about, and I'm sure listeners of this webcast have seen many pictures of orbs, and we find very commonly we find orbs around the group, over the group, etc. when we're out in the field. And yet most people do not see these orbs with their naked eyes, and yet if you set off a camera, most flash bulbs or flash strobes on a camera put out a fair bit of infrared as well as visible light. And it's that infrared that appears to catch these orbs. and reflect back somehow. And it's interesting that very often the less expensive cameras tend to they're less discerning, I guess, and they tend to pick up these orbs often to a greater extent than the very expensive cameras.
And sometimes actual crafts, I mean, there's the kind of standard orbs that appear in photos, and then there are actual really bright points of light that when you zoom in on them have a structure. And I mean, we don't know what all these things are, but they're definitely anomalies that are occurring when we're in the field. And you know, to get back to the crafts that engulf us and people in the field, I'm thinking of an example at Mount Shasta several years ago, where Dr. Greer walked out from our circle into one of these crafts that we could see in the distance as kind of a foggy area, and he totally disappeared from our view. And then he called for us to come, and we saw a flash of his green laser, what looked like his green laser. So I thought that he was also showing us, you know, leading us in a direction of where to come because he knew that we couldn't see him. Well, we walked out there and went into the area where he was and got around him, and it was definitely, I mean, you can, when you're approaching one of these craft areas that you can see as a kind of foggy area, you can literally be outside it and be cold and step into it, and it's detectably warmer. So that's what we did. We went around him, and it turned out that he could see us perfectly clearly. He didn't have any idea that we couldn't see him anymore, and he did not flash his green laser. That was some ET phenomenon that happened that was leading us to him.
Yeah, that leads us to another set of phenomena here. In that case, it was sort of a green flash of light that many people looking at that direction could see, just like a green laser point off. In some cases, the light flashes are very much more subtle, and that will be in the group, and there will be flashes within the group very, very fast. If you aren't looking at there with sort of an open, soft eyes, you might not even see it. But I've seen these many, many times, and Dr. Greer doesn't even bother telling people about them anymore because they happen so often within the circle and above the circle. Now, those are very subtle, and sometimes they appear to be some kind of a probe. A couple years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a training, one of the attendees had set up a Sony night shot video camera and just taking night shots, continuous video of the group. And in several frames, he has light objects sort of zipping through the group, and in one there was this very complex structured, apparently a device, a communications device, but in the etheric that showed up in the video camera and yet doesn't show up in the frame before or after. And yet, if you watch the people in the video, you can see Dr. Greer's head sort of go vertically as though he's watching and following it down until it went into the ground. And that's I'm not sure if that's on our website right now, that picture of the probe, but it's very interesting.
It's totally amazing, and that's correct. That a lot of these things, it is visible light, but it happens so quickly that it's almost imperceptible. And again, you do have to kind of train your eyes to spot these really quick things. And one thing that's really interesting is that one of our team members now has a really high quality video camera and a lens that's a third or fourth generation night vision lens that he
a night scope on it,
film through, and he captured a number of these events when we were at Mount Shasta back in September doing a training. A lot of us were seeing these lights that were coming in very close. We were in an area where our circle we formed our circle in an area where not too far behind us and all around us actually were tall trees. And these events were happening within feet of our circle of people. And we were seeing them, and I know some of the newer people in the group probably thought we were delusional. But what was so interesting is that this man that videoed these things happening made a DVD for us that he was showing at later trainings. And when he slowed down the speed, sometimes slowed it down a lot, it was just incredible what these things we were seeing really were. They were, I mean, just really obvious ET lights that were, flying into the trees and making little formations, and just some amazing things were captured.
Yes, one of the interesting things about it, it wasn't something in the night sky up way above and behind the trees. It was actually many of these lights were actually in the trees or in front of the trees within, say, 50 feet of the group.
Right. And
they showed up beautifully on this video nightscope, high-resolution nightscope and video that he has. It's very, very impressive. And the interesting thing about it is it's confirmation of what some people have been seeing, but many others haven't seen, because these light flashes phenomena happen very rapidly.
Because when the object only shows up in one frame of a video, I don't remember the speed, but it's something like 1/58th of a second that it happened in, and so it's really hard to perceive visually, but it really is happening.
Now, we're talking about some of the subtle flashes. One of the other phenomena that we see, or two other phenomena of flashes while we're on the subject that occur, and I'll talk about the closer ones and the further ones. We have been in the circle in the field, and on a number of occasions there has been a flash, literally right above the group. Not 5 feet, but maybe 50 feet or whatever else above the group, so the whole group is illuminated, as though somebody was above the group with a flash bulb, not an electronic flash, but a flash bulb, and this thing goes off in like pow. And I remember one of the ones that I saw just 2 years ago, which was so dramatic. People had their eyes closed and they could see through their eyelids. The flash was so bright, but the flash came as though it was like, whoosh. It came out, and it was just sort of all-encompassing energy and light, and then it sort of faded back in. So it wasn't like an electronic flash that's occurred in a thousandth of a second or several thousandths of a second. It lasted a much longer time, perceptual longer time. Very interesting, because this is in the middle of the desert, a totally clear night, not a cloud anywhere in the sky, no moon, just nobody within miles and miles of us, and yet these things happen. So these are the sort of the close-up flashes that we see, and the other thing that we often have happen is that we will see in the sky, in the high sky, way out, we will see flash bulb. We call them just flash bulbs going off in the sky. And these are basically ET craft signaling to us. And these things will sit at the same location. And there have been times when we've had 4 or 5 of them in exactly the same location flashing at us for half an hour to an hour. And we've had these on video, and very often. One of the amazing things I recall just recently in one of our trainings, again at Joshua Tree, and we'll get to, we had some other events happen that evening, but we were flashing our green lasers at the area of the sky that we thought phenomena were happening, and suddenly we would get a flash back, as though somebody was up there just with a big flash camera flashing back at the group. And we'd flash our laser at it, it would flash back. Flash our laser, it would flash back. In other words, we were communicating that here we are, yes, we see you, thank you very much. It was just wonderful. And these flash bulbs in the sky happen at every training.
It
often
happens all
several
the
different
time.
nights.
Yeah, and they definitely interact with our laser flashing. Absolutely, definitely, and that brings to mind the quality of ET light is not like light bulbs here on Earth. It's so different, and it's amazing. Like we have seen literal flashes that might occur as though someone flashed a flash camera right, say at chest level among us. Only, it's that brilliant, that bright, and there's no flash cameras. Nobody's doing it. It's an ET light. I've also seen ET light that looks as though, say, someone had a relatively strong flashlight that they're holding horizontally, and, you know, the beam would shine across sort of in a continuum of light. Only when the ETs do it, it's not a continuum. It, like, starts at a point and ends at a point. It is like a chunk of light. They can make a chunk of light. I've seen that a number of times. And the light, it has a color and a quality that is just, you just know it's not an earthly light, even if it wasn't in a strange chunk form. Or we've literally had an ET craft come above us and spotlight us on the ground in a blue light. And we've had flashes, just disembodied flashes occur, bright flashes that anyone could see, you know, in among us in the field, by our hand, by our knee, whatever. It's so many things have happened with light. It's just incredible.
And once again, it's interesting because not there's some flashes that everybody who is conscious sees without any question about it. Like, wow, what was that? And there are other times it's much more subtle that say only a few people may see some sort of flashes.
That's right. You know, one time we were in Joshua Tree again, and this was years ago, and it was a moonless night. And it should have been pitch dark, and we were literally seeing our shadows, like our moon shadows. And suddenly we kind of all started to begin to notice that, why are we seeing our shadows when there's no moon? Why is it so bright? This is really weird. And as soon as we mentioned it, and this was, you know, occurring for as far as the eyes could see on this flat desert plain. And as soon as we mentioned it and started talking about it, it was like the ETs turned off the light switch and it became pitch dark.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that a lot. Like, they'll do something subtle, and when we finally mention it, then they'll stop it, or they'll, you know, tone down the light or something. That, you know, that's another communication, because they know that now we've noticed it, and they can turn it off or whatever.
Yeah, you might be asking, as you're listening to some of this description, why on earth don't they just, you know, show up with the spotlights on, the headlights on, the license plate lit up, or whatever else? I think it's our assessment that this is basically a training. They're trying to teach the group in a sort of a training mode to be conscious, to expand people's consciousness and to be conscious in different modalities of communication, not just, you know, the spotlight on the license plate approach that most people say, well, why don't they just do this? Well, they're trying to, because they do operate for much of their existence or time, or certainly when they're in the Earth's operating field, if you will, they operate in the more subtle astral, if you want to call it that, astral form, which is there, but it's much more subtle. And so they're trying to teach us, as people contact with them, that how to communicate with them, how to observe and see them in that more subtle form. That's right, because, well, not only is it dangerous for them to appear on Earth in a totally materialized form because of our military detection systems, but it's really obvious on these trainings that the ETs are teaching us as well as Dr. Greer teaching, and it's so interesting that the ETs are participating in this. And it's just incredible, because you really get a feeling of communication with the ETs. You begin yourself to communicate telepathically, and you can feel when they're communicating with you, whether it's profound, sometimes they're humorous. The ETs have a great sense of humor. And I forgot to mention, I don't know how I could possibly have forgotten to mention, when we were talking about the auditory phenomena that has occurred, one of the ways that they indicate that they're around and sometimes deliver information is through radar detectors. And I have a cordless radar detector that I bring out to the field, and I can go
several trainings in a row without it making a peep. We're usually many, many miles from anything that could activate it. So when it is activated, it's due to detecting an ET being, where literally we have seen a ghostly kind of being walk across the circle, and when it gets right next to the radar detector will go off as it passes by. Or the radar detector will detect the magnetic fields of ET crafts that are coming in. But we've had this experience now 2 years in a row in Joshua Tree, November of 2007, and this past
November of 2008.
November of 2008, almost to the day, where we've had what we've called the Orion transmissions. And we're going to do a whole, Dr. Greer is going to do a whole World Puja Network episode on the Orion transmissions, because it's just incredible. But it is a way that the ETs and actually even the Celestials have actually used Dr. Greer as an antenna and step-down transformer, and through him, their energy has activated the radar detectors. And this past year, we had 2 different brands of radar detectors in the field that had 2 slightly different sounds. And literally, these radar detectors, the one night were 8 to 10 feet apart, going off independently and sometimes simultaneously, but on different bands. And then the other night, they were literally 2 to 3 feet apart, going off independently and or simultaneously on the same or different bands. And I'm not talking going off, just an occasional burst, which is what we've experienced in the past. In 2007, we had the radar detector go off continuously for 23 minutes, which just blew us away. Well, this past November, well, actually, it's still November, but the past couple weeks ago, the one night it went off. It started off going off kind of intermittently, maybe 30 seconds to a minute apart with its bursts, and ultimately ended in probably 55 straight minutes of 2 radar detectors going off together.
Well, then one night it was almost 2 hours.
And the one night, it was literally.
It was quite amazing, and it was almost interactive about what was going on. And as far as we understand from what Dr. Greer has explained, that there was information being transmitted to the group, and he'll talk about that more in another World Puja program.
But we've had the radar detector. It's anomalous for a radar detector to just make one small little chirp. Usually, when a cop shines radar at you on the highway, it goes through a whole little sequence, and we had the radar detectors going off with one little chirp to kind of punctuate or emphasize what Dr. Greer in particular, and sometimes even other people, were saying in the circle. They interact with the conversation. And years ago, we had these magnetometers that one by one they started kind of fizzling out and not working anymore. But for 2 or 3 years in there, they were so interesting to have because they detected magnetic field flux, and the ETs would communicate through those as well. And we'd have it on and sitting next to typically Dr. Greer in the field, or even in the meeting room, and he would say something profound, and it would beep as sort of emphasize, yes, absolutely interactive. And then also, sometimes he would say something funny, and it would beep. You could tell the ETs actually have a sense of humor, and we're communicating in humor as well.
It was quite anomalous, to say the least, and absolutely fascinating to observe the interaction over a long period of time, not just one little beep, if you will.
And back to the magnetometers again, because we use those in England. We did one of our trips to England, training there in 2000, and in this particular year we had the magnetometers with us. We had one, and Dr. Greer would carry it as we did our field work in crop circles for the most part. there, and we had this one that was shaped like a magnetic dipole that year, and we would walk into it with Dr. Greer holding the magnetometer, and when it would start beeping, we would take that as a signal that that's where they wanted us to form our little circle. We had, I don't remember, maybe 15 or 18 people that year, and we would sit in our circle. Well, this one particular night that we were out there, the ETs were really visible, and they were little, like 3 foot tall. I was seeing them as little Casper the Ghosts, and I think most people saw them like that, although maybe there were some people that saw more detail, but everyone saw the little Casper the Ghost shapes. And so as a sort of a way of teaching, Dr. Greer got up, and he had the magnetometer in his hand, and he stuck it in the middle of one of these little ghostly forms, and it started beeping. And then the little shape moved off, and so he followed it, and he put it inside the shape again, and it started beeping. And so then the ETs clearly began to play with us. And as soon as he would put the magnetometer inside their little form and it would beep, then they would run off somewhere else, and he'd have to chase and follow. And we called it playing hide and seek with the ETs, and we all took turns doing that. And I mean, we were laughing like little kids, and the ETs were literally playing with us and having fun as well as teaching us, and it was amazing.
Yeah, so what we've seen and what you've heard is some of the more subtle things that we've observed in the field, both with our own senses as well as with some simple tools such as the laser or radar detectors and the magnetometers or tri-field meters also work at some level. Probably what we should do is end up the program here, Linda, and talk about some of the more dramatic things. And I'm talking about, seeing things fly around the sky. The aspect of the ET phenomena that most people think is the only aspect.
Right.
What we tried to explain to you over the last few minutes here, whatever it's been, is that there are many, many phenomena. But in reality, we do see very, very dramatic things. Linda mentioned sometimes an ET craft coming close over the group and essentially illuminating the whole group with very brilliant lights from the craft. And we have seen, as various members of the team over the years, we have seen fully resolved, in-your-face ET craft. And I think one of the more dramatic ones that happened in 1996, which I missed, by the way, was an event that Linda observed, again in Joshua Tree. Maybe you want to tell about that experience, Linda, because it includes many of the phenomena that people hear, and it was totally visible.
It was
the Hershey Kiss.
It was one of the most dramatic things I've ever seen, where we had been in a field location in Joshua Tree, and we were leaving that site. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and Dr. Greer had said a little earlier that something was going to happen. It would be very quick and very dramatic, and towards the end of our night. So we were driving out on this gravel road, and I was in the vehicle behind Dr. Greer. This was my first training. I was driving a truck behind the vehicle that Dr. Greer and Sherry Adamak and actually one of his little daughters was in. And suddenly straight down as though, dropped from the zenith of the sky directly into the ground, literally as big as your fist, was this brilliant, it was like a plasma, so sort of almost like fire flames that were the color of teal, blue-green, and white, and just brilliant. And it was shaped kind of like a Hershey's Kiss coming down, where the trailing part at the top was sort of trailing white and teal, and it dropped down, and it looked like it was going to crash into the ground. There wasn't a sound. As it got onto the desert floor, it illuminated the desert floor in white for as far as the eyes could see, and it just merged into the ground and went into an underground base there. It phase shifted into the non-material, and it went into the ground, and that's how we first knew there was an underground base under Joshua Tree. And this happened, it was, I don't know, maybe just half a mile from us on this flat plain, and so Dr. Greer spotted the exact location, and we went right there and to that spot and looked at it. I mean, it was totally undisturbed and normal, and and we have that's how we have chosen one of our field sites in Joshua Tree and been back year after year after year and had just wonderful things happen in that location.
Now, the important part of that event, which I don't think you did mention, was that prior to it happening, at least in Dr. Greer's car, I don't know about your car, but the electrical systems in the car were going through some sort of on-off or dimming down or whatever else. So there was an electromagnetic effect.
Interior dome light, not dome light, all the, dashboard lights and stuff went down.
Yeah, so anybody who's watched Close Encounters of the Third Time, which I suspect many of our listeners have, that was one of the phenomena that occurred early on in the movie of the cars responding to a craft or responding to the electromagnetic effects of a craft nearby.
And another one of the most amazing things I've seen that was totally materialized and anyone could see it was in England. I'm not sure of the year. I think it may have been 98. But in any case, we were on a hill, and it was it had just turned totally dark, and it was probably 10:30 at night or maybe 11, and suddenly in the distance, like over a ridge, popped up. It looked like the color of an orange harvest moon setting, only it was way, way, way bigger than the moon. It was about the size of maybe between a quarter and a 50-cent piece at arm's length that popped up, but it was this kind of orangey color, and it had sort of a structured appearance. It popped up, went down, popped up again, and then dissolved, like a PowerPoint dissolve. And it was quick, but everyone looking in that direction saw it, and it was utterly amazing. And oftentimes when we have something that obvious, or sometimes things even less obvious, military jets come into the area immediately to try to contain any big event that might be stirred up by us.
Yeah, so we just got a couple more minutes here before we finish up this hour on the World Puja Network. Some of these things are discussed on our website, www.CSETI, that's CSETI.org, and you can find out more about what we've observed there. I wanted to finish up with some of the really obvious things that we've seen. And, when you're out in the field, particularly early on in the evening, the first couple hours after sunset, one often sees satellites going over. And many of you have seen satellites, I'm sure. In fact, I'm sure all of you have seen satellites going over, as a brilliant light just sort of flying across the top of the sky. Many of them are satellites. Every once in a while, the ET craft will look just the same. And we have seen these ET craft. We will flash a laser at it, it'll flash back, or it will do a right turn. And when something like that happens, this is not a satellite, or when it happens at local midnight, which is when the Earth, when the sky above the Earth is in total shadow from the sun, and the sun is not going to illuminate any satellite, and that occurs, approximately an hour and a half, 2 hours around local midnight. And so when you see satellites or objects moving across the sky around then, they aren't, they're probably ET craft, although they may be some man-made craft that fly high like that as well. And then finally we have a craft of an ET that flies in very often to us, and this ET will fly in toward the group as though it's coming toward the group, very often take a sharp right turn and then zip right back into outer space again. And we've seen this particular ET craft come in a sort of a bluish-white light multiple times, and almost every training we've seen this craft come in. So, Linda, do you want to add a couple more comments about that? We've basically got about a minute.
Well, I'd just like to point out again that these are not sky watches that we do where we see all this activity. We are actually communicating in consciousness through meditation with the ETs, and so that's why they're communicating back to us in so many different ways, because there's people on Earth that are communicating with them, and they're just thrilled. It's amazing. They're thrilled to find, this small group of people on Earth who are actually communicating with them, and we are establishing a relationship with these ETs, and that's why we have all this interactivity.
So there are very few groups actually on planet Earth actually trying to communicate. Most people either are passive watchers or antagonistic watchers, if you will. So
that's right.
So I will say goodbye, and I'll let Linda close down this session of the World Puja Network, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing about some of the phenomena. These phenomena will be are being collected into a book, which hopefully should be out at some point when the team can get the book together.
That's right. And I'll just say thank you very much for listening on the World Puja Network, and I'll say goodbye, and until next time.
Okay, good night all. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you.